My name is Marcus Del Rey, Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired. I did 22 years in Naval Special Warfare, the last 12 at DEDGRU. 3 combat rotations to Iraq before that was a thing people talked about in newspapers. 2 to Afghanistan. Work in 14 other countries that I will not name here and that you will not find in any unclassified record anywhere. I am not telling you that to make myself sound important. I'm telling you so you understand what I am and what I am not. I know what scared looks like in the dark. I know the difference between fear and the presence of something that operates outside the framework of everything you were trained on. I have been scared. I have been in the presence of the other thing. Those are not the same experience, and any man who has had both will tell you immediately that they are not. On the 14th of March, 1997, 6 operators and 2 civilian attachments entered the Catacombs system beneath Paris, France, through a maintenance shaft controlled by French internal security. We were on a joint operation, classified with a specific objective and a specific extraction window, and all the equipment that a well-funded government sends with a team going into a confined underground environment. 4 of us came back up. The other 2 are still down there. Not their remains. Not their equipment. Them. I know that because we were still on comms when the safety lines went slack. And after the lines went slack, there was a sound in the water. Not a scream. Not anything human. That I will hear until the day I stop hearing anything at all. And then the sound stopped. And then we ran. They told us it was an equipment malfunction. Closed-circuit rebreather failure in a submerged urban exploration route. Tragic and unrecoverable. 2 families got folded flags and a version of events that was a lie in every particular. I signed papers. I took the medical retirement. I cashed the checks and moved to Chesapeake, Virginia, and I kept quiet for 27 years. I am 64 years old. My left lung operates at about 60% of what it was before Paris, which my VA physician attributes to what my records describe as a respiratory incident during a training evolution. I have maybe 5 years left in me. Maybe 8 if something goes in my favor for once. And I am not going to use them staying quiet about what is in those tunnels. So here is all of it. In early March of 1997, our element was attached to a NATO readiness evaluation outside Frankfurt, Germany. Standard cover for keeping DEEDSGRU assets in European theater without drawing congressional attention. On March 9th, at exactly 0400, I was called to Lieutenant Commander Holt's room. Just me. No brief sheet waiting. No other personnel. He had 2 cups of coffee on the desk. When Holt made coffee for a conversation, the conversation was going to take a while. He told me we had been reassigned, joint with French internal security, the DST, Direction de la Surveillance du Territoire. A French special operations element had lost contact with a 4-man team in the Paris Catacombs approximately 6 weeks prior, on February 1st. 1 body had been recovered near the ossuary level, with injuries that Holt described as inconsistent with an environmental cause. The remaining 3 operators were missing. The French wanted American special operations support for a technical recovery and threat assessment. I asked him what kind of threat. He watched me for a moment. Then he said, "Pack for a confined cave environment, closed-circuit rebreathers. We'll get the full picture in Paris." That was Holt. He gave you what you needed to function, and not 1 word more. Let me tell you who the people were, not because I want this to feel like a story with characters, because they were real, and they went into a real place, and something happened to some of them, and I will not compress them into a background detail in their own deaths. Lieutenant Commander James Holt was 43 years old in March of 1997, which made him the oldest man in the element by 6 years. He had been at DEVRU long enough that the newer operators treated him the way you treat old-growth timber, something solid that existed before you arrived, and would likely still be standing when you were gone. He was spare with everything: words, gestures, visible emotion. I watched him give a 4-option tactical order once, using a 2-second pause, one direction of the eyes, and a single syllable, and both chief petty officers he was addressing understood him immediately, and moved. He was not a warm man. He was a precise man, which in his line of work was the more useful quality. He had done things I will not enumerate here, and he carried the weight of them quietly, with very good posture. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Kowalski was our point man. Ray, from Kankakee, Illinois, the kind of Polish Catholic neighborhood that produces either priests or operators. And Ray had made his choice by the time he was 17. He was built like a fire plug. 5'10", 220, forearms like dock rope. He moved in tight spaces better than men half his size, which you would not predict looking at him, and he had what none of us in the element would call intuition, because we didn't use that word, but we all knew what it was. When Ray went quiet and went still, when the idle comfort left him, and he became watchful and careful and flat-eyed, every man in the unit paid attention, because Ray knew things before there was a reason to know them. 14 years in the Navy, half of those at DevGru, and that quality had never left him. It was the most valuable thing about him, and later I would think about how that quality worked in the catacombs. What it must have been like for a man who always knew things first to be in that water. Petty Officer First Class Danny Okafor was our communications specialist. 26, Houston, Nigerian-American, his father a chemical engineer, and Danny with an engineer's mind. He thought in systems and redundancies and fallback protocols. He had been at DEDERU 18 months, which made him the youngest and newest, and he knew it. And he compensated by being the most prepared person in any room he walked into. He triple-checked his radio equipment before every operation, not from anxiety, but from precision. He was the first one with the correct piece of information before you had finished asking for it. He had a quiet intensity about him, a sense of weight behind the stillness, and in the 2 years I had worked with him, I had never seen him rattled. Petty Officer First Class, Aaron Wickham, Wick, 31, Beaumont, Texas. Combat swimmer, primary navigator in underwater environments. More logged hours on closed-circuit rebreathers than anyone else in the element, which was why he was in Paris and not back in Frankfurt finishing the exercise. Lean, dark-haired, left-handed, quiet in the particular way of someone who is comfortable, not processing quiet like Holt, not watching quiet like Kowalski. Wick was at ease the way some men are at ease in water and nowhere else. He had told me once, on a training dive in Chesapeake Bay, that a flooded tunnel in the black was the most honest environment there was. No noise to hide in, no cover, no bullshit. Just you and whatever else was in the water with you. He said that. I have thought about it a great deal in the years since. Our French liaison was Capitaine Etienne Moreau of the DST. 40, lean and weathered, with the face of a man who has spent a career processing information and has learned to show very little of it. His English was excellent, his manner correct to the point of formality, and beneath the formality there was something careful. A man who had been given certain files and had calibrated exactly how much of those files to share and when. He had been briefed by his chain of command on the operation, and the briefing he had received was itself incomplete, and I have since come to believe that the DST intentionally withheld information from even their own liaison officer, because they were not certain an American SEAL element would enter those tunnels with full knowledge of what was in them. I cannot say with certainty whether that withholding was arrogance, or shame, or simply cold bureaucratic logic. It does not matter now. Dr. Sylvie Arnaud was the civilian attachment biospeleologist, Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle, Paris. She was 50, or near it, compact, gray-haired, wearing a field jacket that had been on many expeditions before ours. She had done fieldwork in cave systems in France, Romania, Madagascar, and the Yucatan. And she had the specific quality of a scientist who has found something that the people funding the research did not want found, and who has spent years being very deliberate about what she says, and to whom, and in which rooms. She had been attached to our element by Moreau's chain of command. Nobody explained exactly why a cave biologist was required for a recovery and threat assessment operation in an urban underground environment, and at that point we were not asking the right questions. We arrived in Paris on March 11th. The DST put us in a safe house in the 14th arrondissement, a ground-floor apartment 3 blocks from the public Catacombs entry at Place Denfert-Rochereau. 3 days of planning, equipment checks, route coordination with Moreau, communication protocol setup. Our operational entry was through a DST maintenance shaft 200 meters north of the main public entrance, which allowed us to bypass the ossuary level entirely and descend directly into the lower unmapped sections of the system. I need to explain what the catacombs actually are below the tourist level, because the place is the whole story. Without understanding the environment, you cannot understand what happened in it. The ossuary, the famous section with the skulls arranged on the walls, 6 million dead stacked and displayed, is one level, one part, of a system that extends for 300 kilometers beneath the city. Below the ossuary are the original quarry tunnels, pre-Roman in some sections, expanded and modified across 17 centuries of use and then abandonment. In the quarry levels, the passage is narrow. The ceilings drop to the point where you are moving in a crouch and then a crawl. The smell is limestone and cold water and something underneath both of those that I cannot compare to anything with confidence. And below the quarry levels, in the sections that no public survey maps include, and that the Paris Municipal Authority does not formally acknowledge, the system descends further through rope work and flooded passages that require full dive equipment. The water table in March, with the seasonal rainfall of northern France, is near its yearly high. Sections that are crawlable in August are submerged. In March, the dark in those sections is absolute, not dim, not reduced, total. Your headlamp fails, your hand 3 inches from your face is invisible. There is nothing. And in that nothing, over a very long period of time, things have adapted. On March 14th, at 2100 local, we went in, we moved in single file, through the maintenance shaft and into the quarry tunnel system. Kowalski on point, headlamps on low. Moreau had given us laminated maps. 2 sheets, military survey, with annotations in French and German. I noticed the German text on the second sheet, the Gothic typeface that indicated wartime-era documentation. I filed it and said nothing. At 2143, we passed through the ossuary. Holt called a 30-second halt, and we all stood there in the dark in that chamber. 6 million dead, arranged on every wall, the skull and bone patterns running floor to ceiling, in every direction. I am not a superstitious man. I do not believe that places carry weight from what has happened in them, but there was something in that chamber that was not entirely physical. A pressure, a density that seemed to come from the accumulated presence of what surrounded us, and I noticed it, and I noticed that every man in the element was very still during that halt, and nobody made any noise at all. Arnaud moved through the ossuary without pausing. She had been there before. 2 levels below the ossuary, we reached the first flooded section. The rope work to get there, a 12-meter rappel into a quarry shaft that Moreau said had been off any public record since 1952, had put us well below any part of the system that a civilian explorer would encounter. At the bottom of the shaft, the passage opened into a series of interconnected chambers running east-northeast, and then the floor disappeared underwater. Shins first, then knees. The cold was immediate and significant. 8 Celsius or below, water that had been sitting in that rock for a long time. We had dry suits. Moreau's map showed the passage submerged for approximately 40 meters before opening into a dry chamber on the far side. Kowalski stopped. He held up a closed fist. Full stop. No movement. No noise from anyone. I came up behind him and looked where he was looking. The water ahead of us was moving, not in the direction of current. This section ran roughly south, and whatever current existed in these lower passages ran south. This was moving north, toward us. A slow, deliberate surface displacement, barely visible in the headlamp beams, like something substantial just below the surface moving in opposition to the natural flow. And then, it was gone. The surface went flat. No ripple, no aftermath, just flat water. I looked at Kowalski. He looked at me. His face in the lamplight was still, controlled, but his eyes had changed register. He had gone into the particular stillness that I had learned, over years, to read as a warning. Holt came forward, put his light on the water, held it there for 10 seconds. Then, Kowalski, point. Keep moving. Through the flooded section, 40 meters of cold water at chest height in the dry suits. Slow going, single file, no sound except the push of water against our legs, and up onto a dry ledge on the far side. And there was the chamber. 6 meters wide, 4 meters high, limestone floor. And someone had been living here. GIGN forward position, 6 weeks abandoned. 2 folding cots, still assembled. A portable lamp rig with dead battery packs. 3 days of field rations, still shrink-wrapped and unopened. A Motorola radio with the antenna bent sharply at a point that indicated it had been struck against something. Bent. Not dropped. Not worn. Rope rigging at the far passage wall where the tunnel continued deeper. And a notebook in a DST issue waterproof case lying face open on the nearest cot. Moreau went to the notebook. He picked it up and read. His face changed very little. A tightening along the jaw. Nothing more. He read for 90 seconds. Then he turned to Holt and said, "We should complete the operational brief before we proceed." Holt looked at him for a long moment. Now would be the time, Capitaine. Moreau had given us the cover story. The arms cache. The missing element. He had given us the partial truth. 1 body recovered, injuries inconsistent with environmental cause, DST requesting assessment of what was in the lower system. He had not given us what was in that notebook. He read portions of it aloud, translated, selected, his voice neutral and controlled. Throughout, the GIGN team had been 4 men. Moreau named the one they had recovered, Sergeant Leclerc, and the team leader, Sergeant Chef Dubois, whose notebook this was. The other 2 he did not name, and I understood from the way he did not name them that their families were somewhere in France still believing a version of events. The notebook's early entries were operational. Entry times, environmental readings, equipment checks, standard documentation. The entries from February 1st were different. He read, 0317 hours. Something in the lower passage. Sound carries strangely at this depth. Movement in the water of the southeast approach. Too large for rats. Larger than anything we were briefed to expect in this system. 0409. Leclerc entered the southeast passage on safety line to observe. Line paid to 70 meters. Line tension spiked, then released. Leclerc does not respond to voice signals or line signals. 0438. Leclerc's last position unreachable. Water 2 disturbed. Visibility 0. And then the last entry. The handwriting different. Large. The letters pressed hard. The pen nearly cutting the paper in places. 0501. It comes from below. It uses the flooded passages. It knows every one of them. It is large. Very large. Do not let it hear you breathe. Moreau closed the notebook. Okafor said, "What does that mean?" His voice was flat, not a question. Arnaud said, "Capitaine, now." Moreau nodded once. He said that Dr. Arnaud had documents relevant to our operational understanding of the environment, that he had been instructed to present them at depth, rather than during the planning phase, in the interest of operational security, and that he had been following his orders. Then he said, in a different register, "Quieter, I am not certain those orders were correct." Arnaud opened the waterproof case she had been carrying since Paris. Laminated photocopies. Not originals. Copies of copies, some of them third or fourth generation. The text faded and skewed. She spread them on the nearest cot under the beam of a headlamp. German text, Wehrmacht letterhead, dated November 1943. She translated as she went. A Wehrmacht engineer company had been tasked with extending a drainage tunnel beneath the 14th arrondissement during the occupation. Standard infrastructure work, performed under armed guard to prevent resistance access to the tunnel network. In the process of excavating a new section, they had broken through into a chamber that appeared on no French, German, or Roman survey. The chamber was below the quarry level, below the water table, flooded. What they found in the chamber and in the passages extending from it, Arnaud translated in the language of the original, because I want you to hear the precision. They wrote with German military specificity. They did not embellish. Biological material on the walls, on the submerged floor surfaces, on the exposed limestone of the chamber. Not fossil, fresh, evidence of habitation over an extended period. Passages in the lower system that had been enlarged, in places significantly enlarged, by something that had worn the limestone smooth by repeated passage over what they estimated, from the degree of erosion, to be a very long period. Markings on the walls that matched no Roman quarry notation in the Wehrmacht engineers' reference materials, and no known graffiti convention. And on the final page of the 1943 document package, a sketch. One of the engineers had drawn what he saw in the water when he lowered a lamp into the flooded chamber below the new access point. The sketch was rough, pencil, done by someone working quickly and not calmly. Whatever was in the water was large. Large enough that the engineer had included the lamp cord at the top of the frame as a scale reference, and whatever was below it dwarfed that reference. The outline was not a fish, not any mammal silhouette the sketch made recognizable. It was oriented vertically in the water, not horizontally, the way swimming animals orient. The limbs, if those were limbs, were attached to the torso at angles that I could not reconcile with any biological framework I had for what a large animal looks like, at any viewing angle, in any position. The Wehrmacht had sealed the access point, classified the report as Geheime Kommandosake, and the file had entered French DST possession in 1945, through means Arnaud did not specify, where it had sat in a classified archive until she had been granted research access in 1991 as part of a broader survey of the lower catacomb system. Arnaud had been to the third level once before, in 1992, with 2 graduate students. She had seen the markings on the walls. She had seen the worn limestone. She had collected water samples from the flooded approach passage and found organic material she could not classify through any standard taxonomy she had access to. She had submitted her findings to the museum. Within 18 months, her report had been reclassified by the DST, and she had been instructed to cease research in that section of the system. She had complied. She had kept the photocopies. She said, "What lives in cave systems without light adapts to that environment, across geological time. It loses pigmentation. There is no selective pressure for color if there is no light to see it in. It loses visual capacity and develops other sensory systems. Pressure sensitivity in the lateral line, electroreception in some cave-adapted lineages, echolocation in others. These adaptations are well documented in cave fish, cave salamanders, cave crustaceans. At the scale of what we are discussing, those adaptations would operate at a range and precision that does not have a good analogy in the documented biological literature." Holt said, "What does it eat?" She said, "The ossuary level provides 6 million decomposing remains. Water table movement carries organic material downward. The lower passages are not a sterile environment. She paused. The GIGN team had been in this chamber for 6 weeks. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Holt said, "Mission parameters are adjusted. We are not going to the lower chamber. We are going to the southeast passage to confirm the status of the missing GIGN operators. And we are extracting. 30-minute time limit on the dive. Wick and Delray go in. Kowalski and Okafor hold this chamber. Moreau and Arnaud hold this chamber. Any contact, anything on comms, we extract immediately. Copy?" We copied. At 22:47 hours, Wick and I entered the southeast passage. The entrance was a ledge, a meter drop into water, then the ceiling came down and we were under. Closed circuit rebreathers, no exhaust bubbles, no sound other than the low internal hiss of the unit, and my own blood behind my eardrums. Wick, 2 meters ahead, safety lines running back to Kowalski's position at the chamber. Handheld dive lights and helmet mounts. Visibility in the direct beam was 4 to 5 meters. Beyond the beam, black. Total, absolute black. The passage floor was limestone worn smooth. I ran my gloved hand along it as we moved, and the texture registered immediately as different from water erosion. Water smooths limestone in specific patterns, following the path of flow, leaving striations in the direction of current. This was different, worn uniformly, worn by contact, by something moving through this passage repeatedly, in both directions, for a very long period of time. I noted it, and I did not say anything on comms, because there was nothing operationally actionable to say. At 18 meters by my line count, Wick stopped and pointed upward. Above the current water line, at a height that corresponded to where the water line would have been when this section was shallower, when the water table was lower, there were marks in the limestone of the ceiling, parallel grooves, 4 of them, running the length of the visible passage and continuing beyond the range of our lights in both directions, evenly spaced. I measured the spacing by spreading my right glove fully, thumb to little finger, and the distance between the outermost grooves was wider than that span. Whatever had made those marks had produced all 4 simultaneously, and whatever appendage produced them was wider than a fully spread human hand. They had been made from below. Whatever was in the water had reached up and marked the ceiling. Wick made the continue signal. We had a job. At 31 meters by line count, we found the first of the missing GIGN operators. I am not going to describe what we found in detail. I will tell you that he was identifiable through his equipment tags, and that the nature of what remained was consistent with a very sudden application of substantial force, followed by a rapid change in pressure differential from internal to external. Those are the clinical terms. I am using the clinical terms deliberately. Wick documented with his body camera. I took the tag for recovery confirmation. We signaled, continue or return. Wick pointed forward, 30 meters of safety line remaining on the 50-meter measure. We continued. At 44 meters, the passage opened into a vertical shaft, not a chamber, a shaft roughly 2 meters in diameter, dropping straight down into water that had no visible floor and either of our dive lights pointed downward. The second missing GIGN operator's safety line was anchored at the top of the shaft, paid down into the dark below. It was taut, continuous, even tension on it, like weight at the end. Wick positioned himself at the edge of the shaft. He reached for the line. His reasoning was procedurally correct. You follow the line, that is what a safety line is for. The line moved. Not from anything on the surface. Not from our contact with it. It moved laterally, a slow, sinuous oscillation traveling upward through the line from below. The specific motion of something running through a rope, when the thing the rope is attached to moves. There was no current in that shaft. There was no environmental reason for the motion. The line went slack. All at once, every meter of it, from bottom to top, released simultaneously. The slack line drifted down into the dark of the shaft, and the water in the shaft began to move, upward. A rising motion, a displacement that was not a current, not an environmental phenomenon, but the movement of something ascending from a depth below our lights. I grabbed Wick by the harness and turned and kicked. He came without resistance. He had read it the same instant I had. We turned in the passage, and I had the safety line in my left hand, and I followed it back, moving hard, kicking, pulling myself along the line. The water around us was different from the water we had moved through on the way in. It was disturbed, displaced, a pressure building from behind us that I felt in my chest before I felt it as current. Something was in the passage behind us, below us, and it was moving quickly, and the wave its movement produced was compressing the water ahead of it, and I was inside that compression. At the 18-meter mark, something struck my safety line from below. Not my leg, not my body. The line. A lateral impact, very sudden, from beneath and to the right, and the line went taut downward at an angle that had no business existing, and the force yanked my left arm down hard. I pulled back against it. The line held. Then the force released. Not gradually, all at once. And I kicked, and Wick was moving ahead of me, and I followed him. And at 8 meters the ceiling came back up, and we were at the ledge, and Kowalski was there with both hands on my harness, and he was hauling. I cleared the surface. Kowalski pulled me against the chamber wall. 2 seconds, maybe 3. And the water in the southeast passage entrance erupted. Not a wave in, a pressure release out, as though something on the far side of that 40-meter flooded section had put its full weight behind every liter of water in the passage and driven it through the entrance, simultaneously. The ledge went under 2 feet of fast water in 4 seconds, and I was down in it on my hands and knees, in the dark, with the headlamp under water. Okafor, contact south approach. Something moving in the water south channel. It's at the wall. Holt, bearing. Okafor, south wall. It's in the passage. Something large. In the beam, at the southeast entrance, the water was circling. A slow, continuous rotation that had no environmental cause, that was generated by something in the water below the surface, working against the chamber walls. And then through the circling surface, in the direct beam of my headlamp, something was visible just below the waterline. White, not pale, white. The specific absolute white of a thing that has never been exposed to light, that carries no pigment, because it has never needed pigment, because nothing has ever needed to see it, and it has never needed to see anything in the conventional sense. The portion visible above the chamber floor was wide. I am trying to be precise here because precision is the only thing I have. Perhaps the width of 2 men shoulder to shoulder. It was not a head. It was not a torso in any arrangement that corresponded to anything I had a framework for. It was an upper portion of something that was oriented the way the Wehrmacht sketch had shown. Vertically, in the water, not horizontally. And the limbs, the things extending from it, the things that were moving, were long. Very long. Moving along the walls of the passage entrance, with a deliberate, searching precision. Not thrashing. Not the movement of an animal in distress, or an animal attacking. Searching. Running those long limbs along the limestone surfaces the way you run your hand along a wall in the dark when you're looking for a light switch. It was looking for us, looking for exactly where we had been. I had 2 seconds to watch this before it made the sound. The sound moved through the stone before it moved through the air. It hit my sternum first, a vibration in the rock I was standing on, in the walls, in the 40 meters of solid limestone above our heads. And then it became audible, entering the air as something low and rhythmic and regular. Like sonar, like the ping of a sonar system, except the interval between each pulse was not fixed. It was shortening, becoming more rapid as it oriented. And the pulses were targeted. I know how that sounds. I know how a frightened man sounds when he's explaining what frightened him. I am not doing that. I am reporting what happened. When I stepped left, the pulse interval tightened on my new position. When I stepped right, it followed me right. When I went still, it maintained lock on my specific location in a chamber that also contained 5 other people. It was tracking me individually. It had distinguished me from the other people in the chamber, in the dark, through stone and water, and it was maintaining lock specifically on me. Holt said, "Weapons free." Kowalski was already on the southeast entrance with his MP5. He put a burst into the water at the entry point, 6 rounds, controlled, in a tight pattern. And the water erupted, and the white thing moved sharply away from the gunfire. A reactive withdrawal, fast, the motion of an organism that has experienced pain and is removing itself from the source. But it did not go deep, and it did not go far. It moved laterally to the passage wall, and the sound it was making changed. The pulse's interval slowed, lengthened. The pulses lost their targeting precision and became more diffuse. I thought, it's deciding something. Okafor, south wall, south wall. It's at the Narrows. He paused. Then, Holt. The passage wall is moving. The south passage was a narrow corridor that Moreau had assessed as too restricted for anything substantial to transit. The wall of that passage cracked. The crack ran from the water line to the ceiling in approximately 3 seconds. Sharp and sudden, and limestone fragments fell into the water, and the passage entrance was wider than it had been, and water came through the widened entrance in a push. And Okafor put 2 rounds into the water and stepped back. Holt. Extract. Everyone on the rope, now. Arnaud was already at the rope. She had been watching everything, and she had made her own assessment, and she was moving without being told. Moreau behind her, Okafor, backing toward the rope with his rifle on the south entrance, firing each time the water moved at that opening. Kowalski still on the southeast entrance, putting controlled bursts into the water whenever the circling intensified. Holt. Kowalski. Rope. At the southeast entrance, the water went still. The circling stopped. The surface went flat, and the white went away. Submerged, out of the direct light, descending into the flooded passage, and in the specific way that an absence of something visible is worse than its presence. That moment was worse. It was somewhere in the water. I did not know where in the water. Kowalski, copy, moving. He came off the entrance and moved toward the rope. The southeast entrance came apart. The full volume of water in that 40-meter flooded passage came through the entrance. The chamber floor disappeared under fast water at knee height, and I went down, and my lamp went under, and when I came back up, I was looking at Wick's safety line clip floating on the surface beside me. His clip. The gate was bent fully open. Bent, not broken. Bent in the direction that requires a very specific force applied at a very specific angle, and the force required to bend that gate that way is not a force that a flooded passage or an equipment failure produces. Wick was not in the chamber. He was not anywhere I could see or reach. Holt had my collar. He said, "Rope, Del Rey." His voice was not loud. It was very clear. I was looking at the clip. Rope. The narrowed section that Moreau had assessed as impenetrable gave way at its narrowest point, and the wall fractured, and the water came through in a wall, and Kowalski was between me and the rope, and the water hit him and he went. Forward and down. And I reached for him, and the distance between my hand and his harness was 2 feet short, and my hand closed on water, and then Holt had me by the collar and was hauling me backward. I went up the rope one-handed in the dark, water pouring down the shaft from above. Moreau and Arnaud somewhere ahead of me in the shaft, moving. Okafor somewhere, his voice on the radio calling Kowalski's name, and getting nothing. Holt below me. I could hear him on the rope. I went up. The sound followed us. The low pulsing, the sonar-like rhythm. It was in the walls of the quarry tunnels, as we moved through them, in the rope shaft as I climbed, in the ceiling above my head. Whether it was pursuing us, or whether the sound simply carries that far in that kind of rock, I don't know. I know it was there. I know it continued for approximately 90 meters of tunnel above the chamber before it stopped. Not fading, stopping, as though it had reached a boundary and did not cross it. We came up through the maintenance shaft at 0138, hours on the morning of March 15th. 4 people, no Wick, no Kowalski. Okafor called Kowalski's name on the radio for 12 minutes after we surfaced. Standing on a Paris street in the dark with the shaft at our feet, calling into a radio that was getting no response from below. After 12 minutes, Holt put one hand on Okafor's shoulder and said his name, and Okafor stopped transmitting. A DST vehicle was waiting. Different from the one we'd arrived in. 2 officers in the front who did not speak or turn. We were driven across the city to the 8th arrondissement, a building with no external markings and a garage entrance. Fluorescent lights inside. We were separated before we reached the interior. Holt went through one door, Moreau through another. I was taken to a room with a folding table and 2 chairs, and a man who said his name was Levine and produced no identification. A second man, American, was present and did not speak during the first session. The session ran from 0230 to 0830, 6 hours. Levine asked me to describe the operation from insertion to extraction. I described it. He asked me to describe the entity at the Southeast Passage entrance. I described it. He wrote. He asked me to describe what I had observed of the entity through the disturbed surface. I described it precisely, in the order it had happened. He wrote and occasionally asked for clarification on specific details: the color, the proportions, the behavior after the MP5 fire, the sound. His voice was attentive and professional throughout. His expression told me nothing. At 0630, a French medical officer evaluated me for physical injury and exposure. She was thorough. She documented the bruising on my left hand and wrist from the safety line impact, and photographed it. She noted elevated heart rate and what she described as acute stress responses. She did not ask me what had caused them. She did her job and left. At 0700, Levine returned and asked me to walk through the entity description again from the beginning. I walked through it again. He asked whether I was certain of the size estimate. I said yes. He asked whether I was certain of the color. I said yes. He asked whether it was possible I had experienced hypoxic effects from the closed circuit unit during the encounter. I said no. I have experienced hypoxia. I know the specific perceptual distortions it produces. What I described to him was not a hypoxic episode. He wrote for a while, without speaking. At 0800, a second American entered the room. Older, 50 or 55. Civilian clothes, flag officer bearing with nothing to indicate rank. He sat down across from me and said, "Senior Chief, I understand you lost 2 teammates last night." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What you encountered in the tunnel system carries a classification status that supersedes your operational clearance. A full briefing on what you encountered would require approximately 36 additional classification actions that this command is not prepared to undertake. What I can tell you is that it is real, that it has been documented since at least 1943, and that it is being managed." I said, "2 of my men are still down there." He said, "We are aware." I said, "Then we need to go back in." He said, "We are not going back in." I said a number of things after that. I am not going to record all of them, because they would not add anything to what you need to understand. My voice was not steady, and my reasoning at points was not entirely coherent. The older officer let me finish. He sat there and let me say all of it. Then he said again, in the same register, "We are not going back in." He said, "The operational record of this engagement will document Petty Officer First Class Wickham and Chief Petty Officer Kowalski as lost to an underwater equipment failure during a training evolution in an unsanctioned urban exploration route. Their families have been notified and will receive full survivor benefits and support. This classification does not reflect any judgment about their service, their performance, or the value of their lives. It reflects the operational reality that the alternative explanation requires the declassification of a 40-year French intelligence file and generates treaty-level complications across two governments that cannot be resolved at the authority level of this conversation." He paused. Then, "I am asking for your cooperation. I am not threatening you. The answer does not change if you decline to cooperate, but the path to that answer becomes considerably longer and more unpleasant for you." I asked what happened if I didn't sign. He said, "Then we have a longer conversation in this building, and we still do not go back in." The second day, different building, a DST facility I did not recognize, in a district I could not identify because we were transported in a vehicle with covered windows. Holt, Okafor, and I had been housed overnight in 3 separate rooms, with no contact between us. Arnaud I did not see again until years later. The second session ran 8 hours with a 2-hour break at midday. 3 different interrogators in rotation. The same questions asked in different orders, in different framings, by people with different approaches. One formal and procedural, one almost collegial, one simply silent for long stretches while I talked. All of them were looking for inconsistencies in my account. They did not find any, because there were no inconsistencies to find. What I saw was what I saw. My body camera footage had been removed during the medical evaluation on the first night, before I understood what was happening. Wick's camera was in the water below Paris, Moreau's mission notes, Arnaud's laminated document set, the GIGN notebook, all of it confiscated. When I told Levine on the second day that I had made detailed mental notes of the German document contents, he said, without any particular emphasis, "You are free to remember your experience, Senior Chief. You are not authorized to document or publish it." On March 19th, I signed the non-disclosure agreement. 18 pages, English and parallel French, witnessed by Levine and the senior American, and a JAG officer flown in from Naval Station Naples that morning. The JAG officer read me my rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, formally and correctly, in a neutral voice. His face was the face of a man executing an order he had not been given the reason for. He was doing his job. So was I. I suppose I signed where he told me to sign. I initialed where he told me to initial. I shook his hand, and he left. I was returned to DEDERU on March 21st. Desk assignment for 60 days. Standard post-incident protocol. The command psychologist 4 times over those 60 days. Patient, professional, careful. The diagnosis, ultimately, post-traumatic stress disorder with acute adjustment symptoms. Secondary to the loss of teammates in a training incident. The attending physician noted the respiratory effects and attributed them to cold water immersion exposure. Medical retirement was approved in September of 1997. They bought out the remaining 6 months on my contract at the senior chief rate, and a rear admiral whose name I still remember shook my hand at a ceremony in Virginia Beach and said something about service and sacrifice. And I stood there in my dress uniform and said thank you, and that was the end of my Navy career. Holt retired within the year. We spoke once by phone in 1999. He said, "I believe what you believe. Then, I can't do more than that." He said goodbye, and that was the last time I heard his voice. I have looked for him since. I have not found him. Okafor left the Navy in 2001. He's in Houston. I will not say more than that. I spent the first 10 years after Paris looking for corroboration, not trying to expose anything. I had signed papers and I understood what those papers meant, but looking for evidence that what I had seen had been seen by someone else, named and recorded somewhere. I found partial references to the 1943 Wehrmacht document through a French archivist who did not know what she was helping me locate. I found a 1947 museum internal memo referencing an anomalous biological survey finding in the lower catacomb system, withdrawn from the public archive. I found a footnote in a 1979 UNESCO cave system assessment recommending against extended human occupation of the lower subwater table passages of the Paris Basin, with no reason given and no follow-up. Documentation. Crumbs. Small ones. But they were there if you knew what you were looking for. In 2008, I found Dr. Arnaud's contact information through an academic conference listing. I wrote to her. 6 weeks later, she replied. 2 sentences, and I have them memorized. I have not forgotten what we experienced. I believe we both understand why this record cannot come from me. Nothing after that. I did not push. Raymond Kowalski and Aaron Wickham are on the memorial. They have the flag and the official record and the benefits, and their names are on a wall in a building where people go to remember. The official record is a lie. Their names are real. The loss is real. I have been sitting with both of those facts for 27 years, and I will sit with them for whatever time I have left. Here is what I know. There is something in the rock beneath Paris. It has been in those passages longer than the city has existed above them, longer than the quarry system, longer than any record of human presence in that ground. It lives in the flooded sections below the water table, in the unmapped passages below the ossuary level, in the places where the survey sheets end and the stone closes over everything that human record does not reach. It is adapted to total dark. It is aware of individual organisms in the water with it, separately and precisely. It knows the passages, all of them, every section, every chamber, and it knows the difference between what belongs in that dark and what does not. And when it encounters what does not belong, it investigates. And if the investigation returns a judgment that something is a threat, it acts on that judgment with a capability that a closed-circuit rebreather and an MP5 and the best dive training the United States Navy produces was not sufficient to answer. Except once. That night, in that chamber, it looked directly at me. I have no doubt of this. I will not soften it. And it chose to let me go. I have never understood the reason. I have had 27 years to think about it, and I have not arrived at a comfortable conclusion, and I am not going to arrive at one before I die. Stay out of the deep water. Stay out of the places where the maps run out and the surveys end, and the official record says nothing, because there is nothing official to say. Every day, tourists go into the Paris catacombs. They walk through the ossuary. They photograph the skulls. They walk back out into the afternoon city. They think they have seen the catacombs. They have seen the top of it. Below the ossuary, below the quarry tunnels and the rope shafts, and the flooded passages, and the marks in the ceiling limestone that something made reaching up from the water, there is a level that is not on any public map. And at that level, in water that has never been touched by light, something has been waiting with a patience that makes our calendar look like an afterthought. 2 of my men went in and did not come back out. I was in the water with it, in the dark, 40 meters below a city of 2 million people, and it found me individually in that darkness, and it held a lock on me, and it let me surface. I do not know why. Stay away from the deep water. Stay above the level where the maps end. And if you go down into those tunnels, the real ones, below the tourists, below the bones, and you hear something moving in the water, that is not you and not anything you put there. Do not wait to identify it. Do not wait